I read Kim Porter's tell-all book on Sean P. Diddy Combs, so you don't have to, and I'm going to paraphrase it for you. Kim grew up in Georgia, and after high school, she started getting modeling jobs, and she knew that she had to get out of Georgia if she was going to make it big, so she moved to the West Coast, I'm assuming to LA. This is where she met her husband, Al. So he was in the industry, they fell in love, they got married at 19, and she immediately had a child named Quincy. She really loves this guy. It didn't work out, they did get divorced, but they stayed really good friends, and he's someone that's still very near and dear to her. Then she meets Sean Combs while they're both working at the Uptown label. He's starting to be up and coming, but he's not like huge yet, and he is super into her. He's making advances. She's kind of like, all right, he's cool. I think they go on a couple of dates, but it doesn't become serious, no big deal. But then they run into each other at an event, and he's putting on the charm. He's sitting down next to her, and he's like, you look amazing. And she's like, oh my God, thanks. And he's like, we should get dinner. And she's like, no. And then he's like, oh, Kim, I think I'm falling in love with you. And she's like, okay. So then they end up going to dinner. Something must have happened after their first couple of dates, because in the book she says he's begging for a second chance and she gives it to him, but she doesn't say what happened. So then they end up dating for real. Like they're together for like a year and a half at this point. At one point she's referencing how he comes up to her and he's like, please, can you do it for me again? And it's alluding to pegging him. He's like, please, I want you to do that to me again. And she's kind of like, Sean, no, like I don't want to do that again. And then she kind of makes a sly comment because he's like, oh, like I want you to blank me like that again. And then she goes, isn't Clive the one blanking you? Clive Davis, implying that Clive is blanking him, and then he slaps her hard. And before she can even react, he's like on the floor being like, oh my God, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. She ends up leaving, and he keeps like sending flowers and gifts to her house, and she's like, no, I don't want anything to do with you. But then they run into each other at an event again. He comes up to her, she's like, get away from me. And then he sits her down and he's like, no, you know I love you, nothing's gonna keep us apart, I love your son, like your son is my son, blah blah blah. And that like gets her, because she's like, okay, he is really good with my son. And so she then turns and looks at him and she's like, okay, let's get coffee. She literally says in the book, what the fuck is wrong with me? Girl, don't blame yourself. Then Sean comes to her house for their like reuniting date. He's got flowers. He's like being super good with the kid. Although she does make a note that like he tapped the kid on the butt, like smacked his butt. Weird. He calls a babysitter for them. They go out. The driver is named Gene, and he's got a weapon on him, and Kim like sees it, and she's kind of like, that's weird. And she says like, I'm gonna see this guy a lot more I'm gonna see this guy Gene a lot more throughout my life. They go out, they have a fun night. I think it kind of involves sexy things. Chapter 5, she says the year passed pretty well. They didn't have any problems, but then Sean is getting into voodoo and he's putting curses on people. Okay. This is where Mary J. Blige enters the chat. So I guess he starts working with her, and then he admits that he's actually hooked up with her. And so Kim gets pissed, but then he suggests, hey, why don't we have a threesome, the three of us? And Kim's kind of like, I mean, she is pretty, I don't know. So they end up having a threesome. She's like, I don't know, like Mary J. Blige is super beautiful. I'm not into women, but exploring my sexuality was enticing, so whatever. Over the years, they brought many other women into their bedroom, so they were kind of like, they were open. One day she comes home and Al, her ex-husband, is at the kitchen table with her boyfriend, Sean, which is super awkward. And she's like, okay, this is weird. And she says, you know, the awkwardness between all of us had passed a long time ago, but it's still weird that the two of them are hanging out in my home, like her ex-husband and her current boyfriend and the father of her son, you know? And then after they've been drinking, Al is kind of like, you know, we've all been together, just like not together. Like we've all been together, but not at the same time. And she's kind of like, the fuck do you mean? And then Sean and him are kind of like encouraging her to have a threesome with them, and she's kind of like, first of all, this is crazy, and also like, what if it goes weird, and like, what about my son? But also, I do kind of love both of you, and like, it could be fun, like, I don't know. So she's like, all right, let's do it. And then as it's happening, it's alluded in the book, it's X'd out, but it's pretty clear, the threesome becomes a twosome between Sean and Al, and she's kind of like, what the fuck? So she freaks out and leaves, and Sean's like, babe, come back, it's like totally cool, like don't even worry. And you kind of gather that like maybe this isn't the first time that they've done this, and she's weirded out by this. She couldn't look at him the same for a while. It's strange. And also at this point she mentions she found a vault where he kept all of his encounters with men on video. Come back for part 2, because that's where Pac and Biggie entered the chat. Part 2, this is where Biggie and Tupac get mentioned. So Biggie has taken over East Coast hip hop, and then Sean is basically orchestrating everything in the industry. Like he's got people helping write rap lyrics, he's got people helping produce beats, and he's working with people who are like deciding who's gonna be the next it person. And Sean is sleeping with a lot of people, including very powerful men within the industry. She says like the names that are like, they would blow your mind if you knew some of these names, and also a lot of people you've never heard of but that are really important in the industry. She also says he started hosting parties with fancy names, which were basically just a way to have orgies. When she met Tupac, her and Sean were in an open relationship, and she liked Tupac, so they would hook up a lot. Her and Tupac would sleep together. But then one day things take a turn because she's hanging out and Tupac is there and Sean is there and he knows that they've hooked up, and he basically turns to Tupac and he's like, my baby's bad, right? And Tupac's like, yeah. And he's like, yeah, she is. And Kim's kind of like, like, and then Sean's like, who do you think is better? Like who do you think is like better at doing it to her? And Tupac's kind of like, bro, what? And he's like, let's find out, like, who's better. Like, I bet my blank is bigger than yours. And Tupac's like, what the fuck? And Kim's also like, dude, what the fuck? Super disrespectful. And he's like, yeah, let's see right now. Like, let's see who can make her blank the fastest. And like, it seemed like Tupac then says, like, are you about to take your shit out right now? And like, it's just bad. Kim's pissed because she's like, you're disrespecting me. Tupac's pissed because he's like, first of all, this is awkward. Second of all, I told you 100 times, like, I'm not into you. Sean kept like making advances. Tupac's, I'm not gonna hook up with you, and this is awkward. So he leaves, he's pissed, Kim's pissed. So then things are very contentious between Sean and Tupac. Like, they avoid each other. He's actually now avoiding Kim as well. So like, he wants nothing to do with either of them, and there's just tension between them. She even said like there was a couple times where it seemed like someone was gonna throw a punch. And then she says one day she walks into the studio in the morning and she overhears the conversation. Sean is having a conversation with who she calls Jimmy the henchman, and what she hears him say is, and I quote, "Pac don't leave that fucking studio alive." And then she says, "I don't think I was meant to hear that." So she just continues like she didn't hear that, and she's like, "Oh, good morning guys, I'm ordering breakfast, what do you want?" They place their little orders, like, right? And she definitely heard it. And as this Jimmy guy is leaving the studio, he says to Sean, "Great, let's make that happen." So like, confirmed. And he says, "I'll make the call." I'm gonna read this part verbatim because I think it's important. "I wasn't in the studio the night Pac survived being shot, thank God. From what I understand, Sean and Chris saw Pac at the studio after he'd been shot and did nothing. The way God works. After being shot, Pac made it to the elevator and tried to escape, but it stopped at the floor that Sean and Chris were on. When the doors opened, they saw him lying on the elevator floor, riddled with bullets. The fact that they didn't call an ambulance, although they saw that Pac was sitting there lying, swimming in a pool of his own blood, would be all the evidence Pac ever needed. He, of course, assumed that they placed the hit, and Tupac is a soldier, but this is not something that will be unanswered. Tupac didn't do well. He lost a testicle, but he survived." She says it was orchestrated, and Sean Puffy Combs was the orchestrator. At this point, she knows she's got to get out. So one night they go to a dinner at a restaurant and it's like really fancy. It's the two of them, it's public. And so she was thinking this would be a good time to break up with him. But as he walks into the restaurant, he's on the phone with someone. She doesn't know who he's on the phone with, but she hears him say this: "We're going to release Who Shot Ya now." So they had a song called Who Shot Ya, and he's intentionally releasing it, and it's going to be B.I.G. making the song. Of course they're going to think B.I.G. was talking about Pac. That's the whole point. Nobody would give a fuck about a diss track against LL fucking Cool J. Do you know how much money we're going to make with this kind of rap beef? So he knowingly put the hit on Tupac and then knowingly encouraged a song from B.I.G. that would make it look like it was him that did it, so we can make money off of it. And then she's like, okay, maybe now is not the best time to break up with him. And as he's getting off the phone, he says, "We drop that shit tomorrow. There's gonna be blood in the street. Blank, they missed. Pac's alive. Let's capitalize on that shit." When he responds, it's just gonna mean more money. He gets off the phone and she doesn't look very happy, and he's like, "What's wrong?" And she's like, "Oh, nothing." But like, she was intimate with Tupac. She liked him. So she's like, this is not good. And he's like, "Oh, are you sure you're fine?" She's like, "Yeah," but she's like, Sean's not stupid. So she's like pretending that she's cool, but he can tell that something's wrong. So as she's saying like, "Yeah, I'm fine," he takes her hand and he squeezes it until it hurts. And he says, "That's wonderful, because seeing you walk in the office while I was talking about killing that MF and you not saying shit to me had me just a little bit concerned." And he's squeezing her hand so bad that it hurts. She's like, "You're hurting me?" And then he keeps squeezing and he's like, "You're pretending you didn't hear anything was a sign of your loyalty to me, not something I should be concerned about, right?" And so she said she had no choice but to say what he wanted, and she was like, "Yeah." And so he let go and he's like, "Good." And then he says, "Remember, I'm the big D." And then he's like, "Great, let's have wine." And it's at this moment that she realizes she's trapped. Okay, come back for part 3.